Hello learners, today we are going to discuss about concepts and purpose of environmental impact assessment. So far we have studied a little bit of introduction about environmental impact assessment. Before going into the details of environmental impact assessment, first we have to understand what is environmental impact assessment. Environmental impact assessment is an instrument of environmental management which will be taking on for the newly proposed activities which have notable adverse effects on the natural environment and are based on the approval of concerned national authority. We can also consider environmental impact assessment, which is one of the important environmental assessment tools that is being used worldwide to provide decision makers and the concerned public with essential information to plan for environmentally sustainable economic development. It is a systematic analysis of projects to determine their potential environmental impacts and the significance of such impacts and to propose measures to mitigate the negative impacts. What actually this environmental impact assessment function? How it will function? So, it is supposed to furnish decision makers about the predictable environmental consequences of a proposed project. It will result in environmentally robust decisions. The main potentials of the environmental impact assessment is its flexibility. So, it has a number of strengths, not only the flexibility. If we will see the first one, it can be a flexible process and also employ a large number of evaluation methods and techniques. Secondly, environmental impact assessment, which is increasingly viewed as a process, not as a mandated document. Thirdly, it is becoming a more commonly parallel to and part of standard of an early stage engineering and economic studies. In general, environmental impact assessment is focused on previously selected project, and only the better environmental impact assessments have to be considered the sector as a whole or the wider implications like policies. So, environmental impact assessment procedure that will definitely ensure about environmental implications before making a final decision of assessing certain characteristic features of that particular environment. The environmental impact assessment process is an assessment that examines the adverse consequences on the environment. Again, immediately we can have that question whether it is mandatory or not. If we can say that it is a mandatory for few projects, not all. So, the environmental impact assessment needed projects that planning will provide solutions to the environmental impacts of such projects without disturbing the ethical and sensitive issues of the general public. So, this information provides a chance to the project managers to recover from the drawbacks in the project planning process. Any new project proposer is liable to initiate the process of preparation of environmental impact assessment statement either with the help of concerned institution or the external consultant. And now immediately the question arises, who will give the clearance for this impact assessment? So, the Ministry of Environment and Forest Climate Change is the nodal agency for environmental clearance. So, most of the major projects that have either rejected or facing difficulties because of the inadequate information of their projects with the associated environment. That means they may not have any prior exercise before providing the proposal. So, some of them are not sustained also because of the resource depletion nature, because of hiding the features of the adverse environmental impacts of the proposed project. How can we define with this knowledge and with this introduction of environmental impact assessment? So, we can define the environmental impact assessment. So, according to the United Nations Convention in 1991 itself, environmental impact assessment is defined as a procedure for evaluating the likely impact of proposed activity on the environment. So, that is a basic definition of environmental impact assessment. So, then what are all the aspects which have to be considered for the environmental impact assessment? So, to know that the conducting of environmental impact assessment the environment is considered as the combination of the subsystems. So what are these subsystems? That is a physical environment. In that physical environment also we can consider only geology part, topology, climate, water, air. So these will comes under the physical environment. If we will consider the biological environment, that is the second aspect, that is a terrestrial part, aquatic communities, rare and endangered species, sensitive habitats and significant natural sites. These will comes under the biological aspect. If we will comes to the third one, that is a socio-cultural environment, that also have to be considered for the environmental impact assessment because that plays a major role in the assessment. So under the socio-cultural environment, population, land use, developmental activities, goods and services, and also the public health, which is most important because public health is most important because of the adverse health effects of the proposed project, and recreational parks, cultural properties, customs as well as the aspirations of the people. So now we will comes to the what is meant by the impact. So far we have seen that environment, so far we have seen that assessment, for which aspects we have to consider for certain projects, what are the aspects, and then impact. What is meant by the impact? So we can describe the impact as the result of changes in the environment. For example, increase in air pollution because of the construction of roads or construction of buildings or the construction of malls. So there is an increase in the air pollution because of the initiation of any new project activity is an effect. But the consequence of air pollution on human health as well as flora, fauna, all these are the impacts. So we can understand the environment, we can understand assessment and then impact. So we can also detail about the assessment procedures. So assessment is a procedure. It is a procedure. There is an assembling process, summarizing process, organizing, interpreting the existing knowledge and communicating to policy makers for meaningful deliberations. According to the International Association for Impact Assessment, that is IAIA, environmental impact assessment is the procedure for recognizing, anticipating, assessing and mitigating the biophysical, social and other relevant effects of proposed proposals before major decisions being taken and commitments made. So the potential of human beings by anthropogenic activities for destruction of the environment unintentionally is so far epitomized and evident also through the deterioration of the ozone layer, of course we know that, through the extinction of the endangered species and also through mass deforestation and desertification. So these are the evidential provisions, these are the evidential methods we are everyday seeing. The degradation of natural resources, for example air, water and soil has been reached to the point where the natural environment imposing it on our quality of life is extremely undesirable way. So the inadequate environmental planning, human activities which have been resulted in the disruption of social and communal harmony, the loss of human livelihood and life, so the introduction of new diseases and also the destruction of renewable resources which we are facing today. So this was realized by the people of United States of America when these problems had first started affecting the quality of their life. So environmental movements in United States in 1960s have been strengthened by the environmental concerns of the present day that leads to the enactment of environmental laws. In order to protect environmental green lands and also the human activities in the name of development, this movement had changed the direction to the controlling the chemical hazardous byproducts which are released by the many of industries. At this point, the Silent Spring book was published by Rachel Carson. She is a marine biologist, generated social awareness regarding environmental issues. Among all the developed nations, United States of America realized the need of impact assessment in 1969 and made it mandatory through its National Environmental Protection Act, which we can call it as a NEPA. which is followed by the most of the industrialized countries for implementing EIA procedures. So now we'll come to the main concept of environmental impact assessment. The main concept of environmental impact assessment is to promote socially desirable, economically feasible and ecologically viable solutions to achieve environmental sustainability. So environmental impact assessments are unique in nature since they do not decide compliance to the pre-decided outcome on the environment. Rather, they fix up the responsibility on decision makers to provide environmentally friendly decisions and to justify them in connection with detailed study of the environment, and public comments also have to be received on the probable environmental adverse impacts of the proposal. It is a mandatory for any regulatory system to understand the linkage between environment and the developmental activity in order to make choice of the development that will be economically efficient, socially equitable and responsible and ecologically sound by preventing or minimizing the adverse effects on the environmental health. An effective environmental impact assessment process definitely involve public participation in decision making. This will ensure public security, process independency and impartiality in equilibrating the demands of the environmental development. Brundtland Commission describes the environmental impact assessment as a central management tool to achieve environmental sustainability. On the basis of environmental sustainability, the aim is to inform the process of decision making by identifying the potentially significant environmental effects and risks of development proposals. If we will consider the broader aim of impact assessment, that is to promote sustainable development by ensuring that development proposals that should not sabotage critical resources and ecological functions or the well-being, lifestyles and the livelihood of the communities and people who dependent on them. The Commission also derived the impact assessment objectives, which are to be design the project proposal with greener approach and to assure that resources are used appropriately and efficiently, and to recognize suitable measures for alleviate the likely impact of the proposal, and also enable informed decision making for implementing the proposal, and finally safeguard human health and safety and also reduce irreparable changes and serious damages to the environment. It also states that to protect assessed resources, natural environment and ecosystem components, and also the augment the social aspects of the proposal, impacts of the environment which have been classified into primary and secondary impacts. If we will consider the primary impacts are those impacts which can be associated directly to the proposed action. For example, the proposed activity is a construction site of an amenity like wastewater treatment plant or construction of a residential society, or we can say that the primary impacts on the action, that is a construction, would have been maybe it is a waste removal and disposal, land use changes and also the facility site and local environmental damage. If we will consider the secondary impacts, they are those impacts which are indirect or induced changes like investments and deviation in normal social and economic activities. So in this example, the secondary impacts would include the environmental impacts which are related to indirect changes in the pattern of land use and the density of population, and also the related effects on air, water and other natural ecosystems that will be affected. Now we will come to the what is the purpose of environmental impact assessment. We know that it is a procedure which has three important purposes. If we will consider the first one, that is to facilitate decision making. That means it provides a coherent evaluation of the environmental consequences. In general, it is an adverse environmental consequences of a proposed activity, and sometimes occasionally it provides options. So before a decision is taken up by the decision makers, that may be the local authority, the decision maker compile all relevant documents of the planned proposed activity that can consider environmental impact statement. And the second one is to assist in the formation of development. In that, most of the project proposers feel that environmental impact assessment is another barrier to cross. So the process has various steps which are involved in obtaining the approvals from different competent authorities, which is expensive and time consuming exercise. But in fact, environmental impact assessment can be of huge benefit to them, since it will provide a meaningful framework to overcome the location and the design in addition to the environmental issues. It assists in formulation of project activities and the specified areas where the project can be reviewed to reduce or eliminate completely the adverse impacts on the environment. This also helps in early identification of the environmental impacts in the planning stage itself of the development that leads to effective project development. Healthy relations between the basic concepts of environmental impact assessment developers, the planning authority and the local communities for successful completion of the project and financial return on the incurred expenditure, and also to become a management tool for sustainable development. So the concept of sustainable development, we all know that it is a meeting of the needs of the present, continuous improvement of the quality of life by economic growth without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs and without environmental damage. So the institutional responses to the sustainable development, therefore, it is required at several levels. According to the UNEP principles, the procedure for environmental impact assessment should be conducted as per the legislations as initial or comprehensive. The conversation provides an opportunity to the likely to be affected state with a right to participate in the National Environmental Impact Assessment for representation and also to monitor the multilateral or joint assessment. The joint or multilateral assessment will be possible only when incompatible of the data or the situation exists. Rio Declaration in 1972, it itself recognizes the concept of viable environment as a decent, healthy one and also advocated the promotion of environmental quality by active control on wrong practices in every member state. In 1992, Rio Declaration recognized and promoted the concept of collective solidarity rights and proclaims that all persons have the right to secure, healthy and ecologically sound environment adequate to meet equitability the needs of the present generations, so as not to impair the rights of future generations and their needs, which is the fundamental right of the sustainable development. If we will see the specific objectives of environmental impact assessment, they are to anticipate and point out potential environmental problems at an early stage of the project planning and designing. If we will consider the environmental impact assessment meticulously, that examines beneficial and adverse consequences of the project and ensures that these effects are taken into account during project design. It helps the government in anticipating environmental effects of the activity proposed, mitigating measures for predicted adverse effects and foresee the effects after implementing the mitigation measures also. The purpose of environmental impact assessment is to protect the environment through proactive early considerations of the environmentally friendly design options and alternatives and to avoidance and the prevention of adverse environmental consequences in order to influence key decision making throughout the entire life cycle of the designated project. Dear learners, I will conclude this session by developing countries. The development includes the quality perspective, we all know that provides the basic needs of the human community and also to secure the better perspective. So one way to ensure the development is to carry out environmental impact assessment of developmental activities and basic concepts of environmental impact assessment that ensure that the measures are incorporated properly in the planning process. In today's session, we have learnt about the concept of environmental impact assessment, the overview and the purpose of environmental impact assessment. Thank you.